Welcome the anointed ones. The truth doesn't destroy people, it destroys illusions, and some people are made entirely of those. Let that marinate, because what we're about to get into isn't just gossip, it's forensic truth surgery. And guess what? The chosen one wielded the scalpel with terrifying precision. See, here's a little-known fact. Psychologists say the human brain literally short-circuits when it's confronted with undeniable truth it spent years suppressing. That's not poetic, that's neuroscience. And right now, they're glitching like a corrupt file on a crashing hard drive because you said what nobody had the guts to say. You pointed, you named, and you refused to flinch. And now they're unraveling like a dollar store wig in a hurricane. What makes it even more tragic and low-key funny? These same people once mocked you, called you dramatic, said you were doing too much, but now they're crying in lowercase on social media, lighting sage they don't understand and calling therapists they never believed in because you didn't just speak, you read the entire book and footnoted their demons. Periodt. You didn't come for revenge, you came for clarity, and clarity has a way of turning the lights on in rooms people preferred to keep dark. So buckle up, because this isn't just another they mad now moment, this is a full spiritual audit. Let's talk about why they're spiraling, why your voice hit like thunder, and why you calling out the truth wasn't petty. It was prophetic. Number one, they laughed when you whispered truth, but now they're drowning in the echo. They laughed when you first spoke. Not because you were wrong, but because they never thought your words would matter. To them, you were just background noise, easy to dismiss. They thought if they rolled their eyes enough, mocked you enough, and got others to join in, they could reduce your truth into a joke. But the thing about truth is, it waits. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't rush. It lingers quietly until it echoes. And now, that echo is getting louder in their lives, in their relationships, in their minds. They're spiraling because what you said is happening. Every warning, every red flag, every uncomfortable truth you spoke, it's now playing out like a prophecy they refuse to believe. They're not just haunted by your words. They're being crushed by them. It's not funny anymore. Not when the mask is falling off. Not when the consequences are knocking. See, they underestimated you. They thought you were reacting, but you were reporting. They thought you were emotional, but you were exact. And that precision is what's tormenting them now. You didn't scream to be heard. You dropped truth so sharp it's cutting through their lies without ever raising your voice. The irony is you didn't even need to expose them. You just told the truth about who they were, what they did, how they twisted reality. And now, that truth is unfolding publicly, in the way people look at them, in the energy they're attracting, in the things falling apart around them. It's not karma taking its time, it's cause and effect, arriving right on schedule. Now they're pacing, rewriting events in their heads, trying to flip the script again, but it's not working, because you're still standing, and your truth aged well. It didn't expire, it matured. It grew legs, found a microphone, and started preaching on its own. They're not spiraling because you hurt them. They're spiraling because they heard you, finally, and they can't unhear what you revealed. The echo of your truth is louder than their entire performance ever was, and it's only getting started. Number two, you named the demon they were sleeping with, and now it's wide awake. You didn't just call out their behavior, you called out what was fueling it. That's the part that shook them to their core. You didn't attack their personality, you exposed the spirit behind it. You stripped away the surface stuff and hit the real nerve, the part they hoped no one would ever detect. You spoke to something deeper, darker, and older than the drama they pretended was harmless. And when you named it, it woke up. They were fine as long as the dysfunction was hidden under charm, jokes, and fake spirituality. But you disrupted the agreement they had with their own darkness. You forced them to see that it wasn't just how they are, it was what they'd partnered with. That's why they're spiraling. Because now, even they can't deny what's driving them. And it's ugly. It's manipulative. It's controlling. It's hungry for attention and allergic to accountability. When you named the spirit, you changed the whole dynamic. It went from personal conflict to spiritual exposure. You didn't come with petty clapbacks or drama. You came with discernment. And discernment doesn't play nice. It tells the truth straight. And truth has a violent way of shaking things that were built on lies. That's why they can't sleep. That's why they're paranoid. That's why they're watching you from burner accounts. Because they know once a spirit is identified, its power starts breaking. You were never the threat. The truth in you was. The light you carried irritated the thing they were trying to protect. And when you put language to it, when you said it out loud, it disrupted the whole illusion. They didn't expect you to see it, let alone say it. But you did. And now they're dealing with the aftermath of being spiritually exposed, not just to others, but to themselves. You didn't just expose a behavior. You pulled back the curtain on something ancient, something they thought they could keep hidden under fake smiles and good PR. But now it's wide open, and the more they deny it, the louder your words echo. That's why they're unraveling, because once something dark is named, it can't hide anymore. Number 3. They didn't expect you to survive long enough to speak clearly. They never thought you'd survive long enough to tell your side. That was the plan all along. Wear you down, break you mentally, isolate you emotionally, and finish you off quietly. They didn't think you'd make it to the other side of the mess with your mind intact, let alone your voice. That's what's got them panicking now. You weren't supposed to heal. You weren't supposed to remember. You definitely weren't supposed to speak. They expected you to stay buried under shame, confusion, and trauma. That way, even if you ever tried to speak up, you'd come across broken, bitter, or unstable, just like they painted you. They were betting on your silence or your self-destruction, but instead you came out clear, calm, and with receipts. That shook everything. You lived through the fire, and now you're standing with clarity, calling out the exact games they tried to erase. You didn't just survive. You evolved. You became the very thing they feared, a credible narrator, someone who lived it, healed from it, and can now articulate it without shaking. That's dangerous to people who built their reputation on your silence, because now your words aren't messy. They're measured, and people are listening. They worked overtime to destroy your credibility before you ever opened your mouth. Smearing your name, spinning false stories, playing victim in advance. But all of that's collapsing now because you outlived the narrative, and your presence, healed, grounded, unbothered, is proof that they lied. That's why they're unraveling, because the person they tried to bury is now the one revealing the truth. You weren't supposed to still be here, but you are, and not just breathing, thriving, speaking, shining, and telling the whole truth without fear. You're the wild card they couldn't predict. The survivor they tried to silence, the witness they didn't account for. And now that you're speaking, the story they told is falling apart piece by piece. They're not spiraling because you're dramatic. They're spiraling because you're still standing, and you're telling the truth they tried so hard to erase. Number 4, you weren't seeking revenge, you were delivering a report. They thought you were lashing out. They assumed you were just hurt and trying to get even. But you weren't moving from pain. You were moving from clarity. You weren't trying to ruin anyone. You were simply documenting what happened. You were stating facts, not throwing shade. And that's what made it so unsettling for them. You didn't curse them out. You didn't scream. You didn't threaten. You just spoke. And the truth hit harder than any revenge plot ever could. You didn't need to dramatize anything. The truth was dramatic enough. All you did was press play on what really went down. You weren't trying to rewrite the story. You were reading it back exactly how it happened. And that scared them, because the details didn't lie. You weren't emotionally spiraling, you were spiritually aligned. And when someone moves in alignment, not emotion, their words carry weight that can't be dismissed as anger or bitterness. That's why they're nervous. Because they know what you said wasn't just a vent session. It wasn't gossip. It was evidence. And evidence doesn't go away just because it makes someone uncomfortable. Your words became a mirror they can't shatter, a playback reel they can't pause. You weren't ranting. You were filing a report to the universe. You were handing the truth over to divine order. And now divine order is responding. They can't accuse you of slander. They can't call it exaggeration, because your tone was calm, your delivery was firm, and your memory crystal clear. They weren't prepared for that. They were ready for you to scream, cry, beg, or blow up, because that would have made it easier to discredit you. But instead you chose accuracy. You told it like it is, And now, everything is catching up to them. You weren't trying to get revenge, you were telling the truth because it needed to be told. And now, that truth is doing the work for you. No theatrics, no games, just raw, undiluted clarity. And they're spiraling because they know there's no way to silence a report that was always meant to be heard. Number 5, you called them out, but you also called out their audience. The part that really broke them wasn't just that you exposed them, it's that you exposed everyone who kept their mess covered. You didn't just shine a light on one person, you lit up the whole room. And suddenly, all the people who clapped for their lies, who nodded while you were being torn down, who watched in silence, now they had to look in the mirror too. That's what triggered the spiral. You didn't just call out one manipulator, you called out the entire ecosystem that protected them. You forced people to confront their role in the abuse, the ones who looked away, who said, stay out of it, who saw what was happening and still chose convenience over conscience. You made it uncomfortable to stay neutral. And for people who survived by pretending not to see, that's devastating. Because now their silence is part of the exposure, their applause is part of the guilt. The one you called out wasn't just scared of being exposed, they were terrified of being seen. And now that everyone around them can finally see what you were trying to say all along, the illusion is collapsing, the filters are gone. The reputation they curated with lies, charm, and manipulation is dissolving, not just in private, but in front of their people. It was all good when it was whispers and rumors, but when you came forward with clarity, the game changed. You gave people no room to twist it. You pulled out the timeline, the patterns, the red flags, and you did it in a way that made it impossible to ignore the audience they used to perform for. Now they're backing away, questioning, watching with new eyes. Some are even apologizing to you behind closed doors. You didn't just interrupt their show, you shut it down and exposed the crew behind the curtain. That's why they're spiraling. It's not just shame. It's the collapse of a carefully constructed lie that depended on everyone staying blind. But now that the truth is out, the mask isn't just off. It's in your hand, and everyone saw you take it. Number 6, you revealed the infrastructure of their illusion. You didn't just catch them in a lie, you exposed the entire operation. That's what really sent them over the edge. You didn't just point out the bad behavior, you revealed how it was all strategically built. The lies weren't random, the manipulation wasn't impulsive, it was a system, a calculated setup designed to control outcomes, protect their image, and keep you and others confused, quiet, or broken. They weren't ready for someone who could trace the patterns, not just the incidents. You saw how it all connected, how they played victim to some while villainizing you to others, how they triangulated, pitting people against each other so they could stay above suspicion, how they used charm to mask control, how they performed kindness while orchestrating chaos behind the scenes. And then you broke it down out loud. You didn't just tell people what happened, you told them how it happened, why it kept happening, and what it was really about. That's why they're spiraling. Because you didn't hit them with random accusations. You brought blueprints. You exposed the entire formula. You revealed that this wasn't a one-time situation. This was their lifestyle. A rehearsed act with moving parts and a backstage full of lies, manipulation tactics, and silent co-signers. They were used to fooling people one interaction at a time, but when you revealed the infrastructure, people started realizing it wasn't just you. They've been doing this. They've been getting away with it because no one ever traced the whole system until now. Now eyes are opening, patterns are being recognized, and even their supporters are starting to distance themselves. Not because they believe you blindly, but because the architecture of deceit finally has a spotlight on it. That's what makes your exposure so devastating. You didn't just tell on them, you told the truth behind them. You hit the root, not the symptoms. And now that people understand the game, it can't be played the same way anymore. The illusion is broken, and they know it's never going back. Number 7, you forced them to see themselves without the costume. They worked hard to create an image, a carefully constructed version of themselves that could never be questioned. To some people, they were the selfless helper. To others, the innocent victim who never did any harm. They wore different costumes depending on the audience, each one designed to protect them from accountability. And for a long time, it worked. People bought into the performance. They played their roles so well that even you at one point doubted what you were experiencing. That's how convincing the act was. But then you did something they never expected. You told the truth with no sugarcoating, no filters, and no theatrics. You didn't just expose what they did, you exposed who they really were behind the performance. And once you did that, the show was over. The script fell apart. The audience shifted in their seats, the lights came on, and there they stood, stripped of every mask and every excuse. You didn't embarrass them, you revealed them. You showed people that the kindness was transactional. The humility was a front for control. The tears weren't sorrow, they were strategy. And now that everyone can see it clearly, they're scrambling. But there's nothing left to hide behind. The disguise was destroyed in real time, and they know they can't go back to pretending. That's why they're spiraling. Because now, when they try to play the martyr, people hesitate. When they tell their side, people remember what you said, and more importantly, how accurate it was. The costume they used to slip into so easily now looks ridiculous, and worse, fake. They're not the misunderstood hero anymore, they're just a manipulator with a well-rehearsed act that finally got exposed for what it was. The worst part for them? You didn't need to scream or exaggerate. You calmly described what everyone had already seen but couldn't name. And once something is named, it can't go unseen. The mask didn't just fall off. You took it off mid-performance, and now they're left standing in front of the very people they fooled, with nothing but their real self exposed. And it's not the role they wanted anyone to see. Number 8. Your truth destroyed their reputation because it was built on your silence. They built an entire image on top of your silence. Their reputation, their relationships, even their so-called spiritual standing, all of it depended on one thing, you keeping quiet. As long as you stayed silent, they could continue crafting their perfect story. As long as you didn't speak up, they could keep being the good one, the wise one, the one who was always somehow the victim in every situation. But the moment you opened your mouth and told the truth, the entire illusion began to crumble. You weren't out to destroy them. You were simply done protecting the lie. And that lie was the glue holding their fake image together. You didn't need to twist anything. You didn't need to exaggerate. All you had to do was speak. And that alone caused the foundation of their reputation to crack, because that foundation was built on your silence, your restraint, your suffering, and your refusal to fight dirty. People don't realize how many fakes stay standing because the real ones refuse to speak. You were protecting them by default, not because they deserved it, but because you had integrity. But when you finally broke that silence, it became obvious to everyone that their entire persona was a performance. You didn't need a smear campaign. You didn't need to expose screenshots or dig up receipts. Your lived experience, calmly spoken, clearly remembered, and undeniably real, was enough to bring their empire down. And that's what's tearing them up inside. Not that you lied, but that you told the truth. A truth so undeniable that it exposed how much of their character was curated. They're spiraling because they know their image wasn't destroyed by some outside enemy. It collapsed from the inside the moment you decided to stop carrying the weight of their reputation on your back. They wanted to look strong, wise, and spiritual, but only if you stayed small, confused, and quiet. Once you spoke, it was game over. You didn't cancel them. You didn't have to. You simply exhaled, and the house of cards came down. Number 9. They didn't just lose control, they lost the script. For years, they controlled how the story was told. They twisted timelines, rearranged facts, and assigned roles, casting themselves as the victim, the wise one, the misunderstood hero. And you? You were painted as unstable, too sensitive, or just plain difficult. They directed the entire show from behind the scenes, feeding people just enough half-truths and emotional manipulation to keep the spotlight exactly where they wanted it. It wasn't just about control, it was about ownership of the entire narrative. But then you found your voice, not a loud, chaotic voice, a calm, clear, and undeniably accurate one. And with that, the story started to shift. You didn't just speak, you told it better, you brought context, you brought details, you brought memory with receipts, not necessarily in text, but in energy. And suddenly people who had clapped for their version started sitting back, squinting, questioning everything they thought they knew. Now the confusion is on them. The control they once held so tightly has slipped through their fingers. They're scrambling to reframe the narrative, but nothing's landing the way it used to. Their words don't hit. Their manipulation doesn't move people. They look out of place in a story that no longer bends in their favor, because now you're the narrator. And the wildest part, you're not even being dramatic about it. You're not performing. You're just speaking from a place of truth. And it's working. People are realizing that the version of events they were sold was fiction. And what you're offering, it's real. It lines up. It makes sense. It feels true. And that's killing the control they once had. They're not just angry, they're panicking. Because when you lose control of a lie, all that's left is exposure, and they know it. That's why they're spiraling. They didn't just lose their grip, they lost their ability to write the script. The show has flipped. The crowd has turned, and for the first time, they're not the hero. You are. And this time, your voice is the only one the audience wants to hear. Number 10. Your accuracy was their downfall. You didn't come with vague accusations or messy emotions. You came with precision. You weren't just telling a story. You were laying out a timeline, connecting dots, recalling specific conversations, tone shifts, manipulative patterns, and the exact ways they moved in the dark, thinking no one was watching. You didn't throw around random blame. You named what happened, exactly how it happened. And you did it with a clarity they never expected you to have. That's what made your truth hit so hard. You weren't trying to be heard. You were just stating facts. And the facts were so specific, so spot on that there was nowhere for them to hide. You didn't stumble across the truth. You lived it, you studied it, and when the time came, you spoke it without fear. That's what exposed everything. Not the volume, the accuracy. You broke down their tactics so clearly that even the people who once defended them had to pause. The way they deflect, the way they twist meanings, the fake apologies, the calculated kindness before a blow-up. You laid out the playbook in such detail it was impossible to deny, because the truth didn't sound bitter. It sounded familiar, too familiar. That's why they're not just angry. They're terrified. You didn't guess their game. You understood it. And when someone truly understands a manipulator's pattern, that manipulator loses power. They know they can't run the same script on you anymore, and worse, they know you've exposed it to others. The spiritual consequence, that was the final blow. You didn't just call out what they did, you identified the energy behind it. And now that it's been named, it's losing grip. People are looking at them differently now. Not because you told them to, but because your accuracy rearranged the entire atmosphere. That's what made the difference. Not drama, not rage, just truth, told with surgical clarity. You didn't need to shout. You hit them with precision, and that's why the whole thing is falling apart. Because when you're that accurate, people stop doubting you and start questioning them. Number 11. They called you crazy. Now they're copying your blueprint while collapsing. They laughed at you, mocked your insight, rolled their eyes when you tried to explain what you felt, what you saw, and what you sensed. They labeled it overthinking, called you paranoid, accused you of being too deep, too sensitive, or just plain delusional. They weaponized your awareness because they didn't understand it, and honestly because it exposed things they weren't ready to face in themselves. But now, the same ones who called you crazy are taking notes. They're out here parroting your phrases, quoting your wisdom, suddenly adopting the same mindset they once made fun of, using your exact vocabulary like they thought of it first. But there's a difference. It doesn't work for them. It doesn't carry weight because they never lived it. They're trying to wear your blueprint like a costume while their own foundation is crumbling beneath them, and it's obvious, it looks forced, it feels hollow, because truth can't be faked. And definitely not stolen. They thought your discernment was delusion until life started proving you right, again and again. Now they're spiraling because the stuff they used to mock is now the only thing keeping them afloat. But here's the thing. Truth doesn't bend for survival. It responds to alignment. And since they rejected it when it was pure, they can't reap its protection now that they're desperate. What's wild is they didn't just mock your insight. They needed you to be wrong. Because if you were right, it meant they'd have to change. Now they're in crisis, imitating your clarity, clinging to your perspective, but still unwilling to admit where it came from. They wanted your fruit, but not your root, your results, but not your process. And it's failing. They're collapsing under the weight of their own hypocrisy, because you can't discredit someone and then quietly try to become them. Truth doesn't play both sides. It protects those who honor it, not those who plagiarize it. So while they're scrambling to survive using the same wisdom they once dismissed, the truth you carried is still standing tall, because it was never a trend for you, it was your walk. Number 12, you shattered their spiritual entitlement. They walked around cloaked in spiritual language, using scripture, prayer circles, and high-vibe mantras as armor, not to heal but to hide. They thought because they could quote a verse, light a candle, or speak in spiritual cliches, it excused the damage they were doing behind the scenes. They weaponized grace. They hid behind forgiveness. They threw words like love and light over behavior that was anything but. And for a while it worked. People didn't question it because they looked spiritual. They sounded wise. But then you showed up and told the truth. You shattered their illusion of spiritual superiority with something they didn't expect. Discernment. You weren't moved by their performance. You saw past the incense, the Bible studies, the affirmations, and the image. You spoke truth with surgical clarity. And when you did, all the spiritual smoke they used to confuse people started clearing. You didn't come with drama. You came with revelation. And that's something fake spirituality can't withstand. They were used to getting away with manipulation dressed up as boundaries, gaslighting hidden under just protecting my peace, cruelty masked as God told me to distance myself. But your truth pierced straight through that nonsense. You made it clear. Real spirituality isn't a shield for shady behavior. Grace doesn't cover what you refuse to confront. And God doesn't co-sign manipulation. The moment you exposed that, their spiritual safety net evaporated. Their language lost power. Their aura dimmed. People started seeing the contradiction. How they spoke about God but didn't embody integrity. How they preached healing but caused harm. How they talked about energy but moved with ego. And that's when things started breaking down. Now they're feeling what they once thought they were immune to: consequences, repercussions, karma. Not because you wished it on them, but because truth has a law of return. And the truth you spoke activated something that no prayer circle or carefully curated persona can stop. They're not protected anymore because the cover was never real. It was built on lies. And now that it's been stripped away, what's coming isn't random. It's justice. It's alignment. It's divine order restoring balance, and they're feeling every bit of it. Not because you cursed them, but because you told the truth. And the truth came with a sword. Number 13, they're not sorry. They're just scared you'll keep talking. They're not losing sleep because they feel bad. They're losing sleep because you've proven you're no longer keeping their secrets. Let's be real. If they were truly sorry, they would have changed before they were exposed. They would have come clean, taken accountability, made it right. But they didn't. They denied it, spun it, and tried to make you look crazy for speaking up. Now that the truth is out and people are listening, suddenly they look remorseful. But that's not guilt. That's damage control. They're not crying over what they did. They're panicking over what else might come to light. You were the vault that kept their image intact. You were the one who held your tongue out of grace, out of maturity, out of love, even when it hurt. They counted on that. They built their stability on the assumption that you'd never fully tell the story, that you'd take it all to the grave just to keep the peace. But now that you've spoken once, now that you've shown you're capable of telling the truth with no filter and no fear, every day is a threat to their illusion. They're spiraling because your voice is a reminder that they don't control the narrative anymore. They don't know what you'll say next. They don't know how much you know. They don't know who's listening now that your words are resonating. It's not guilt that's got them pacing. It's the loss of control, the exposure, the risk of having to face the full story, not just the parts they cherry-pick to look innocent. The apology will come, but not from sincerity. It'll come when they feel the walls closing in. Don't be fooled. They're not sorry, they're scared, because they know they earned every consequence that's now making its way toward them. And your voice, steady, clear, unapologetic, is the one thing they can't silence anymore. You were never vengeful. You were honest. And now that honesty is echoing louder than their entire performance ever did, that's not guilt you're witnessing. It's the panic of someone realizing the mask is off and you're still talking. Number 14, you didn't ruin their life. You revealed it was built on ruin. They want to blame you for their downfall, call you the reason everything's falling apart. But the truth is, you didn't ruin anything. You just stopped playing along. You stopped pretending that their version of reality was the truth. You stopped covering for them, shrinking yourself to protect their image, biting your tongue to keep the peace. And the moment you stepped out of that lie, their whole world started crumbling, because it was never built on truth to begin with. They were the ones who built their life on manipulation, control, and illusion. They crafted a version of themselves that looked stable on the outside but was rotten underneath. And for years they held it together by leaning on people like you, people with integrity, loyalty, and emotional intelligence, people who gave them the benefit of the doubt even when they didn't deserve it. But when you pulled your energy back, the illusion cracked. Not because you exposed them with drama, but because the truth finally had room to breathe. You didn't destroy them. You simply reflected them. You became the mirror that showed them what they really are when there's no one left to blame. And that reflection is brutal, not because you're being cruel, but because it's undeniably accurate. They're seeing themselves without the excuses, without the masks, without the applause. And it's not pretty, it's not spiritual, it's not noble, it's insecure, it's manipulative, it's dishonest. And that's on them. Now they're spiraling, trying to convince people you ruined their life. But what's really happening is that the life they built is revealing itself for what it always was. Unstable, shallow, and propped up by deception. And without your silence to hold it up, it's collapsing brick by brick. You didn't tear anything down, you just walked away from the performance. And when the spotlight shifted, people saw the truth. They were never the victim. They were just hoping you'd carry that lie forever. But now that you've let it go, the collapse isn't sabotage, it's revelation. And it's loud, it's real, and it's long overdue. Let's be clear. You didn't come to destroy, you came to tell the truth. You didn't lash out, you didn't plot revenge, and you didn't create chaos. All you did was stop protecting the lie. And when you did, the entire illusion they built, the fake image, the twisted narrative, the stolen power, started crumbling under the weight of your clarity. They're not spiraling because you hurt them. They're spiraling because you disarmed them. With truth, with calmness, with discernment. You didn't play their game, you named it. And when you did, you became everything they feared, undeniable, unbothered, and unstoppable. They thought they could hide behind pity, behind charm, behind false spirituality and collective gaslighting. But your voice was louder than all their performances combined, not because you shouted, but because you spoke with authority. Every word you released became a mirror, a spotlight, a reckoning. And now they're running out of people to fool. This was never about vengeance. This was about release. You released yourself from the burden of silence. You released them from the fantasy they created. You released the truth. And in doing so, you let divine justice take its course. You didn't need to push the tower down. You just stepped back, and it collapsed all on its own. So stand firm, because you're not the villain in this story. You're the plot twist. You're the interruption that exposed a long-running illusion. You're the narrator now, and truth is finally being told on your terms. Let them spiral. Let them perform. Let them panic, because the truth doesn't need defending. It just needs to be told. And you told it flawlessly. And if they're mad, that's proof you hit the nerve. If this message hit your spirit, don't just scroll. Do something with it. Subscribe to the channel if you're tired of watered-down truth and ready for real, raw, spiritually charged insight that actually shifts atmospheres. Like the video, if you've ever had to walk through betrayal, silence your pain, or be the villain in someone else's twisted narrative, only to come out stronger. Comment below with what part hit you the hardest. Speak your truth. Let it be known. And share this with someone who's been gaslit, silenced, or underestimated. Someone who needs to know they're not crazy, they're clear. This channel is a safe space for the chosen, the awakened, the called, and the misunderstood. If you felt seen today, it's because this space was made with you in mind. Don't just watch. Join the movement. Let's keep flipping the script. One truth at a time. God bless you.